Welcome back to the channel. I am your humble host, D-Base. That is talent on loan from Kolob. I'm finishing up my debate preparation for the debate challenge that Jacob Hansen gave to me back in December of 2023 regarding the building of Mormon temples. The proposition was, are the building of Mormon temples the single greatest way to fight poverty on this planet? Now, I've accepted that debate challenge and released a number of videos, and I know that Jacob himself is aware that I've accepted the challenge. In fact, let me play this short for you.
When are you debating Dives or Xmo-Joe? Xmo-Joe? I don't know who that is. I know who Dives is.
I know him.
I know he made some random debate challenge. I think he was like preparing for it and was like calling me out, and I was kind of like, bro, what do you like? Why don't you like email me or something?
But here's my number, so call me maybe.
Dude, like, if you want to actually do this, like, he made literally like whole videos about me apparently, and like he runs the Mormon News Review, which is kind of like, I do genuinely think, I don't know, maybe I won't say that.
Say it! Say it!
Dives is let's just say he's an interesting character.
The most interesting character.
If he wants to actually do a formal debate, I mean, if we can come up with an interesting and compelling topic to debate, I might be open to that. Why don't you just email me and ask, and we can talk about it instead of making entire episodes weird.
He doesn't remember.
Wait till they get a load of me.
I am waiting.
See, we know that he knows that I've accepted it. And by virtue of the fact that he has not acted, I am taking the win by default right here. Unless I hear from him, I presented all of the evidence and he has not met his burden of proof. This will be the last video as far as I'm concerned with regard to this debate prep, but I found some very interesting information that directly looks at whether the building of these Masonic esoteric castles actually helps anyone in any meaningful way. So let's jump into it. I voiced some of my research here with AI, and then I'm going to provide my inspired reaction. Don't forget to turn on the notifications, hit the like, and subscribe for more inspired content right here on the Mormon News Roundup. Let's go.
Should I open the card first? This is totally unexpected. This was not planned. Boy.
Does it say from Mark Hoffman?
Arguments against the proposition that building Mormon temples and the LDS prosperity gospel lifts people out of poverty.
Right. It's not just the idea that building the temples is a poverty fighter, but the entire prosperity gospel. I will examine that in this episode here today.
1. Wealth concentration within the church. Critics argue that the vast financial resources used for temple construction could be better allocated directly to humanitarian efforts or poverty alleviation, rather than creating expensive buildings that primarily serve church members.
Right. The church has vast financial resources, somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 billion. And its humanitarian efforts are shockingly low, only giving away less than 0.5% of its wealth annually. What we need is a critical and rigorous analysis of the return on investment of these temples versus putting the same amount of money into poverty-fighting programs.
2. Focus on spiritual wealth over material aid. While the LDS prosperity gospel emphasizes spiritual blessings, this doesn't always translate into tangible financial support for impoverished communities. The teachings may prioritize personal faith over addressing systemic poverty issues.
Right. That's the entire problem here, is that the church promises that if you pay tithing, then you will be blessed. But you have to be able to tie in the payment or donations to the church with tangible blessings in this life. I have never seen a demonstration of a direct causation between these two things.
3. Temples don't directly address poverty. Temples are religious spaces for ordinances and spiritual activities, not centers for economic development. The resources spent on constructing and maintaining temples do not necessarily help the poor in practical, direct ways.
That's the understatement of the year. Constructing and maintaining temples, I argue, doesn't affect anyone in any really meaningful way, especially with regards to the eternal consequences of the rituals that are performed inside. And germane to the topic at hand, I don't see any evidence that building of the temples lifts anyone out of poverty or helps anyone really economically, except for the construction team that is tasked with either building the materials, delivering them, or assembling them, or the contractors who are involved.
4. Tithing burden on the poor. The church requires members to pay 10% of their income as tithing to access the temple, which can place a significant financial strain on low-income individuals, potentially exacerbating their financial challenges rather than lifting them out of poverty.
I mean, not even the church itself espouses this idea. You have to pay to get into the temple. It's not like, hey, if you qualify to go into the temple, then you unlock certain financial benefits to yourself. Quite the opposite.
5. Limited accessibility for impoverished members. Many impoverished members cannot afford to travel to distant temples, and the benefits of temple attendance may be out of reach for those in economically disadvantaged areas, leading to an unequal distribution of spiritual and financial support.
Temples are generally constructed in areas that have a high economic status or a high socioeconomic status and are almost never built in areas where there's poor people. And I think that that is a damning indictment of the idea that they lift people out of poverty if they're generally put into wealthy areas.
6. Religious guilt and pressure. The LDS prosperity gospel can create pressure on members to associate financial success with faithfulness. Those who remain in poverty may feel guilt or unworthiness, leading to spiritual or emotional strain without offering real financial solutions.
And we see time and time again that the senior leaders of the church are usually persons of significant wealthy means. And quite frankly, those at the bishop or the stake president level, anecdotally, we've seen that as well. There's a huge shame culture that goes along with the paying of tithing into the church. And in fact, there's a lot of fear mongering. If you don't pay tithing into the church, then you will be burned by Jesus during his second coming. You won't be able to hold down most reasonable callings. You will not be able to enter the temple. You're essentially a second-class saint.
7. Overemphasis on tithing. For many members, paying tithing becomes a priority over other essential expenses. This focus can cause individuals to neglect personal financial stability in favor of fulfilling religious obligations, which may hinder their ability to escape poverty.
If you go back and review some of this particular series where I've looked at the prosperity gospel and LDS tithing messages given over the pulpit, both in general conference and in written settings, you will see that certain general authorities have espoused the idea that even if your children are starving, that you should still pay the church first. I've also gone over some of the statements of President Nelson and others who said that the only way to break the cycle of poverty is for impoverished persons to pay money into a mega multi-billion-dollar corporation. I don't even know how to describe that kind of a mentality, but it's a pure evil, in my opinion. And one final note on this particular point is the fact that Utah is frequently among the top 10 in bankruptcies in the nation. If paying tithing was such a financial blessing to people, one would expect areas in which there are high concentrations of Mormons to see additional financial success, not a high rate of bankruptcy.
8. Wealth inequality within the church. The church's extensive wealth and investments, including a $100+ billion fund, raise concerns about whether enough resources are being dedicated to alleviating poverty among its global membership, especially when large sums are spent on temples.
So the average temple is probably around the neighborhood of $25 million as per the Widow's Mite report, and that's on pretty good reporting. And the church has a Ensign Peak Fund, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $170 billion right now. And that allegedly has not been used to help anyone for anything except for building a luxury mall and bailing out an insurance company. So the church is not using its wealth to fight poverty in any meaningful way from the reserves of Ensign Peak, and the church's humanitarian donations are not externally audited, so they can't be confirmed.
9. Prosperity gospel can foster unrealistic expectations. The prosperity gospel's emphasis on faith, equating to financial blessings, can create false hope. For many members, faithfulness does not lead to increased wealth, and this can lead to disillusionment or a feeling of betrayal.
So many Mormon leaders have promised that by paying tithing that the, quote, windows of heaven will be opened unto you. This was basically made famous by Lorenzo Snow in the late 1890s, where the church really hammered home its tithing message, where you needed to pay in order to play, where you couldn't have callings, you couldn't go to the temples. And the problem is that many people have not seen their lives get better by paying tithing, and they haven't seen their financial budgets magically balance themselves. What they've seen is that their disposable income goes to the church, and then they are left wanting.
10. Neglect of structural economic issues. While temples and the prosperity gospel emphasize individual responsibility and spiritual rewards, they often ignore broader economic factors such as inequality, lack of access to education, and systemic poverty, which need to be addressed on a societal level.
I don't see how Mormon temples address some of our fundamental problems, especially here in developed countries, about wealth inequality. The lack of education is a serious problem. People don't have access to clean water. People don't have access to health care. These are the items that you see all of the major corporations out there when they fight poverty. None of them have anything to do whatsoever with Mormon temples because nobody takes that idea even remotely seriously. Now, I found a couple of studies that look at Mormon temples and the prosperity gospel. And here's the first one here.
Title: Evidence-Based Dialogue: The Relationship Between Religion and Poverty Through the Lens of Randomized Controlled Trial.
Now, this particular study didn't look at the Mormon prosperity gospel, but it still looked at it in general.
Conclusion: the poverty and spiritual wealth of religions. Religions provide resources and open doors, but also place hurdles in the way of poverty alleviation efforts.
Right. I mean, the argument here is that religions can provide resources for people. They operate food kitchens. They can help their parishioners. They can pool resources together when somebody is having a difficult time here. But they also place hurdles in front of people because you have to be an adherent, or in the Mormon church, for instance, you have to pay tithing to unlock those blessings. So sure, there's some doors that are open, but there's also hurdles that are put in your way. And here's the most important conclusion from that particular study.
The role of religions can be characterized as relevant, but ambivalent.
Ambivalent. In other words, participating in religion doesn't help you that much and it doesn't hurt you. It is relevant to the conversation, but it's basically a wash. That's a sum up of this entire study here. Now, the second study I found was with Heaton and Meyer, and they discuss the ramifications of paying tithing and poverty among Latter-day Saints.
Heaton and Meyer in poverty. It is impossible to directly calculate the changing poverty rate among Latter-day Saints because the Church does not have precise information about members' incomes. The commandment to pay tithing is likely daunting to church members in poverty. While the Church may seek to avoid the trends of the world, it is unable to escape the world's high poverty rates.
Now, the church keeps careful track of how much tithing people give and how much donations they receive, but it doesn't have information about actual members' income rates. Therefore, the results of this particular study say that it's impossible to determine whether giving donations to the church results in changing of poverty. That means that the burden of proof for Jacob has not been met with this particular study. It also says how difficult it is to pay tithing for people who are in poverty. If you live in an area where you are on $2 or $3 a day, for instance, the church is getting a lot of converts in Africa, for instance, approximately 100,000 converts a year. Asking those people to send that money back to Salt Lake City is very, very daunting. And the final conclusion here is that paying tithing, the entire prosperity gospel, makes it so that it's unable for people to escape the world's high poverty rates. In other words, paying tithing doesn't help with poverty. That's the basic bottom line of this particular study. Now, the most important study on Mormonism, the prosperity gospel, and tithing and temples is from this Journal of Economics, Theology, and Religion article here, just released a couple of months ago by Dallin Overstreet in the Journal of Economics, Theology, and Religion, Volume 4, Number 1. Let's look at the abstract. This paper examines the relationship between Mormon temples and county-wide poverty rates in the United States. The Mormon Church teaches that obedience to the law of tithing, which requires members to donate 10% of their income, can break the cycle of poverty. Using the presence of a temple as a proxy for tithing participation, I test whether counties with temples exhibit lower poverty rates than comparable counties without temples. Employing several difference models on county-level data from 2010 to 2018, this paper finds no statistically significant evidence that temples reduce poverty rates. The results suggest that the presence of a temple has no effect on county-level economic outcomes, contrary to Mormon doctrinal claims about the power of tithing to alleviate poverty. This finding is likely attributable to the way in which the church allocates tithing revenues, a highly centralized and hierarchical affair with no clear mechanism to reduce poverty in the communities from which the funds are sourced.
The elusive economic blessings of tithing, Mormon temples, and county poverty. Dallin Overstreet, Arizona State University. Journal of Economics, Theology, and Religion. The results suggest that the presence of a temple has no effect on county-level economic outcomes, contrary to Mormon doctrinal claims about the power of tithing to alleviate poverty.
No effect on county level economic outcomes. Zero.
Despite the strong confidence expressed in church doctrinal assertions, scant empirical research has examined whether tithing adherence actually reduces poverty as claimed.
So there's not that much research, but what we do have shows that it doesn't do anything at all. In fact, it might be a hindrance.
Additionally, the Church provides no clear causal mechanism for explaining how faithful adherence to this doctrine will produce decreases in poverty.
We need a causal relationship between a donation and a supernatural agent blessing you in your life. That's the critical key here. And I've never seen any demonstration of a link between those two.
The results provide no statistically significant evidence that gaining a temple reduces county poverty rates over either the short or long run.
Temples do nothing economically for people.
The null results suggest that the LDS Church, contrary to claims, does not efficiently reallocate tithing funds in a manner that reduces poverty.
Right. It's not just that temples themselves don't fight poverty. It's that the church's donations, when you give it to the church, they don't reallocate it in any meaningful way that can be tracked that helps other people with poverty. There's no statistically significant evidence of any of these claims.
The logical and theological foundations underlying the strong Mormon prosperity gospel claims that link faithful tithing to direct economic returns have been critiqued by scholars of religion and philosophy.
Right. So when sociologists and economics examine this, they critiqued it, they debunked it. No one believes in this except for Mormon adherents, and everyone else is at odds with the church's claims.
However, no existing studies in economics or other social sciences have yet rigorously and empirically tested these Mormon prosperity gospel claims by credibly estimating the causal effect of tithing adherence on verifiable economic measures or outcomes, such as community poverty rates over time.
It's an area that hasn't been studied rigorously. That much is true. But what we do know shines a dim light on the church's claims.
Overall, empirical evidence remains limited and inconclusive regarding the impact of tithing on poverty at either individual or community levels.
So this is important because we don't have definitive data here and it's inconclusive. It's not like this debate is a draw. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. And we've seen over and over again in these couple of different studies here that there's no causal relationship between a donation and your ultimate economic status. Therefore, the null position is to be accepted, which is that there is no connection.
Estimates suggest that only about 6% of tithing revenue is returned to local congregations for annual budgets. Widows might report 2024.
That is a shockingly low level of money to be returned to the local congregation. So everyone in a local congregation contributes their donations, their fast offering, their tithing, or whatever else to the church. 94% of that goes to church headquarters and is not returned to that local congregation. That is stunning.
One of the smallest expenditure categories included in these estimates is humanitarian aid, making up about 2% of tithing expenditures by the church.
Alleged tithing expenditures by the church, I might add, because the church is not externally audited. We can't confirm even that low level of giving.
About 15% of total annual tithing revenues are deemed excess and are added to the church's investment fund at Ensign Peak.
Right. The church receives around $7 billion in total tithing donations per year, but its budget is around $6 billion. So there's where that 15% comes from.
At the local level, the church collects about $211,000 in tithing revenue annually on average per congregation.
And I've heard that that is obviously much higher in North America. It might be as much as $500,000 in North America, and then obviously in other locations far less than that. But that's obviously a lot of money in donations.
However, just $13,000 is returned after central church officials have reallocated the funds.
And that's why ward budgets are chronically so low, is because all of the money goes to church headquarters, or virtually all of it.
On the one hand, paying tithes is associated with higher religious devotion, which research links to greater thrift, a better work ethic, and self-reliance, all with the potential to lower unemployment and poverty. Thus, concentrated numbers of full tithe payers may naturally experience less poverty.
When they say naturally experienced, that means that there is a correlation, but not a demonstrable causation. That's very important here. People who can afford to pay tithing have a higher socioeconomic status, but that's not because of the tithing itself. It's because they have the disposable income to make those donations.
Counties with temples had, on average, lower unemployment rates, higher median household incomes, and higher average levels of education than their counterparts.
And that's typically because the church puts the temples into areas of a high socioeconomic status. They typically do not go into areas of high poverty. Now, here's where they rigorously examined the temples versus the county poverty rates.
Upon treatment, there is no statistically significant divergence in trends between any of the timing groups and their synthetic counterparts in terms of their poverty rates.
When they're talking about timing here, they're talking about looking at the socioeconomic status of a county before a temple came in and then examining it after a temple was put in for the following couple of years. There's no significant divergence in trends. In other words, putting a temple into an area does nothing.
Taken together, the suite of complementary models provides no empirical evidence that constructing a new Mormon temple significantly reduces local economic hardship.
I mean, I could literally just end the debate right there. That's it. This is cannot be any clearer than this. And now this particular study also takes a look at the tithing donations itself, using the temples as a proxy for tithing participation in the church.
Using the presence of Mormon temples as a proxy, this study empirically evaluates the claim of the LDS Church that obedience to the law of tithing could reduce poverty in communities with high levels of tithing participation. Applying difference in differences models to county-level poverty rates and temple presence data in the U.S. from 2010 to 2018, the findings revealed no statistically significant impact of temple presence on poverty rates.
Right. So it looked at every county in the United States from 2010 to 2018 and then did the treatment. In other words, did it have a Mormon temple that was built into it during that time? And then looked to see if the Mormon temple actually helped fight poverty in that area. And once again, there is no statistically significant impact on poverty rates. I'm not at all surprised.
This outcome provides a critical perspective on the economic implications of the financial practices of the LDS Church, particularly regarding the reallocation and distribution of collected tithing funds.
This particular study seems to be hinting at the fact that taking so much money out of a local congregation definitely doesn't help poverty in that particular community.
While data limitations currently rule out explicit testing, the stark gap between the promised prosperity gospel benefits of tithing and the actual null results revealed is likely attributable to fundamental flaws in the way in which the senior leadership of the LDS Church reallocates tithing revenues.
Every single sentence in this study is a thunderbolt. The church doesn't have a good plan for fighting poverty. It hoards most of its wealth in Salt Lake City instead of reallocating it in a logical manner to lift up the hands that hang down and strengthen the feeble knees.
The church's financial management is highly centralized and lacking in transparency, with key spending decisions made by a small, insulated group claiming divine guidance.
A perfect summarization of the Q15, a highly centralized, insular group claiming divine guidance. That is a perfect sum up.
This opaque, top-down decision-making structure has no robust system of checks, balances, or accountability to rank-and-file adherents who supply billions in annual tithing revenues.
That is absolutely true. These guys did their homework. I just love this study so much.
Only a small portion of collected tithes returns to the local congregations from which they originated.
It's so nice to see that the things that I anecdotally know from experience of decades in the church and of years of covering the church in the Mormon News Roundup have now been confirmed through peer-reviewed journals.
Moreover, a mere fraction of the church's revenues is explicitly directed toward humanitarian aid or charitable initiatives that could meaningfully alleviate poverty.
A tiny fraction, only $1 of every church donation is spent on humanitarian purposes, alleged humanitarian purposes, whereas over 100 of those dollars are put into investment funds. The church is not a poverty fighter in any meaningful way, and temples don't contribute a fig to helping lift people out of poverty.
Even for these relatively small outlays, funds are not necessarily deployed in the specific communities where tithes were paid, which undermines any clear causal mechanisms for localized poverty reduction as described.
They keep hammering home the causal mechanisms here. You have to provide the causal mechanisms, and they weren't able to find any. And I've never heard anyone provide any good evidence that building a temple, and I've never heard any rational argument backed up by data that shows that temples do anything for anyone economically.
Although greater religious devotion may be associated with reduced poverty, requiring members to give up substantial income through tithing without receiving the promised economic benefits, either directly or indirectly, in return could undermine this positive effect.
And this is what that other study was hinting at, where the religions can provide a gate whereby people can lift themselves up out of poverty by being in a communal environment and have access to certain funds that they wouldn't normally have access to. The putting of the poverty mostly requirement on members can also be a hurdle. These two studies are showing the same result.
The findings raise critical questions about whether maintaining the church's tax-exempt and deductible status is justified when its opaque financial practices seem disconnected from stated aims such as poverty alleviation.
This is so good. Oh my gosh, these guys are right on. How is it that the church has a tax exempt status when it doesn't do hardly anything demonstrable for anyone to lift them out of poverty? And this is the whistleblower's complaint with David Nielsen, when he said that the church, this Ensign Peak, its clandestine celestial slush fund, didn't do anything to help people fight poverty. I mean, that's the entire reason that we give churches a tax exempt status, at least in the United States, is under the auspice that they will be doing something good for others. And these studies have consistently shown that the Mormon church does virtually nothing to help anyone lift themselves out of poverty.
This paper also makes an interesting case study for research linking religious hierarchies and power structures with organizational decision-making. Financial decisions made by the LDS Church are a highly centralized process.
Yep.
When organizational decisions are left in the hands of a few individuals who claim to speak for God on all matters, questionable policies and practices may emerge.
That's the understatement of the year. I love that this is in a journal. Individuals who claim to speak for God, highly centralized, and this is the kicker. Questionable policies and practices may emerge. Yeah, just like we learned from the SEC fine and the entire debacle of the church forming a bunch of shell companies and lying to the government and its members for years. These guys know their stuff.
In this case, the mechanisms through which poverty alleviation would occur through the faithful payment of tithing are not clear.
Exactly. It's not clear. It hasn't been linked together. This is just another way that they're saying that there's no causal relationship between paying tithing and getting out of poverty. They said it in every single different way that they possibly could.
The church's finances are handled exclusively by senior officials and are not transparent.
Indeed.
Additionally, estimates from available sources appear to show a disconnect between the expected uses of tithing funds and their actual uses.
Exactly. James Huntsman sued the church for $5 million, saying that he thought that he was paying tithing and that it would be used to help fight poverty. But instead, all it was used for is the building of a luxury mall and the bailing out of an insurance company. We have numerous statements over the pulpit and in church official publications that say when you give a donation to the church, that it will be used to help others. And yet what have we found? Very little is used to help anyone in any meaningful way. And I'll just finish this out myself. It says, unfortunately, the financial practices of the church do not appear to target poverty in any meaningful way. Let me go back and say that one more time. Unfortunately, the financial practices of the church do not appear to target poverty in any meaningful way, resulting in the null results found by this study. The null result is that there is no connection until a connection can be demonstrated, and this very rigorous study and several others have shown no connection between giving donations to the Mormon church and lifting people out of poverty. As far as I'm concerned, this is going to be my last video on the subject. I'm going to take the victory here by default that the Mormon prosperity gospel doesn't add up. I've done several videos on this, and until somebody provides some good evidence to shows that giving a donation to the church actually helps that person economically, then I think that these significant studies have showed that there is no connection that has been demonstrated in between those two. Now, let me know in the comments below what you think about the entire concept of a Mormon prosperity gospel. Do the building of temples actually fight poverty? Does giving a donation to the church result in financial blessings to the individual? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining me on this special episode of the Mormon News Roundup. Always think celestial, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When are you debating Dives or Exmo Joe?
Exmo Joe? I don't know who that is. I know who Dives is.
I know him.
I know he made some random debate challenge. I think he was like preparing for it and was like calling me out, and I was kind of like, bro, what do you like? Why don't you like email me or something?
But here's my number, so call me maybe.
Dude, like, if you want to actually do this, like, he made literally like whole videos about me apparently, and like he runs the Mormon News Review, which is kind of like, I do genuinely think, I don't know, maybe I won't say that.
Say it! Say it!
Dives is let's just say he's an interesting character.
The most interesting character.
If he wants to actually do a formal debate, I mean, if we can come up with an interesting and compelling topic to debate, I might be open to that. Why don't you just email me and ask, and we can talk about it instead of making entire episodes weird.
He doesn't remember.
Wait till they get a load of me.
I am waiting.